Geeks and geekettes, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to another thrill-packed, information-loaded, curiosity-satisfying episode of Ask Chuck Dixon, where you get to ask me, Chuck Dixon, about what I do for a living. And what I do for a living is I write comic books. Let's not waste another second of your precious time. George oh man, I'm murdering your name, George. I'm sorry. You say you store your comics in a storage unit. How do you store them? What kind of boxes? Do you use shelves? I use these things that my wife suggested years ago. And they're Sterlite show-offs. They don't make them anymore. And if you can find them on eBay, they're incredibly pricey. And they're plastic, and they seal to keep the things waterproof. My wife suggested switching over to a container like this because, let's face it, over time, long boxes and short boxes begin to smell a little bit. And they're certainly not waterproof, and they're unattractive. And she suggested these, and I'm like, I'm not so sure. I'm going to tell the story the way my wife wishes I would tell the story. Boy, this is getting geeky, isn't it? How to store your comics. Next, I'll do an episode on bagging and boarding. But anyway, she suggested using these, and I was like, I don't know. I'm not so sure. And then I was at a convention in Orlando and saw a retailer using these. And I was like, okay. I saw them in action, in other words, with comics in them and how easy they were to stack and move and all the rest of it. And I came home and told my wife, and she said, well, I told you so. And I bought just a ton of them. I went to Target and bought all they had, and every time they restocked, I kept buying them until I was finally able to put all of my comics in these containers. And what's nice about them is they're transparent and they're perfect. They're a standard size, like a Silver Age forward comic. Boy, we're getting geeky, aren't we? Silver Age forward to current comics will stand upright in them perfectly, absolutely perfectly. And Golden Age and magazine size comics you can lay flat and perfect. They're absolutely terribly, incredibly versatile. I wish they still made them, although I have all I need. I wish for you they still made them so you could get your comics out of those crappy long boxes and into something that'll actually preserve them better. And for those of you who are saying, Chuck, you have your comics in a storage unit, it's a climate-controlled storage unit. And I don't keep my personal collection in there. I mean, I have a big collection of like 50s and 60s Western and war comics. That's the bulk of my collection. What's in storage are my comp copies stored in those show-offs. I keep 3 copies of every comic I've done, and keep them in these containers. And if you're wondering what that looks like, it's a wall of containers, 8 containers high, 10 feet across, to contain 3 copies of everything I've ever written. Saved for posterity. Saved for my sons to have a garage sale someday. But that's how I store my comics. And if you can find something akin to a Sterlite show-off, or maybe we could all lobby Sterlite show-off to put them back into production, because they're really terrific. Okay, Twin Spin. Good for you. George is back with Skybound printing both Marvel runs of G.I. Joe and Transformers and Kickstarter hardcovers. What are the chances of your G.I. Joe run getting collected in that format? Yeah, I bought the G.I. Joe box, and they raised like I think $2 million. So, I mean, good for them. And it collects every issue of G.I. Joe in like a 4-volume set in a box. I got the G.I. Joe box. I didn't get the Cobra box, but this is what the Cobra box looked like. And in this box, and then there's all these tchotchkes, dog tags, and stickers, and yeah. But it was a hell of a deal, considering. But would they collect the IDW run? I don't really think they would, because it didn't, I mean, IDW collected it into a series of really nice hardcovers, like oversized hardcovers, which I actually prefer to the way that Skybound did theirs, because Skybound did them roughly the same size as a comic book. I like when they reprint stuff larger, like the DC and Marvel Omnibus editions, because I'm getting older and my eyes aren't what they used to be. But I'd like to see I'd always like to see my G.I. Joe run, and that whole run with Mike Costa and Cobra and all that. See all of that collected once again, because why not? Keep it out there, keep it in print, because I really enjoyed. I have very fond memories of working on the G.I. Joe series, both because the editors I was working with were very talented, and it was just a lot of fun playing in Larry Hama's backyard. Hippopotamus, he asks, back in 1996, DC Comics had a bunch of annuals called Legends of the Dead Earth. And I looked up on Google to see if he wrote any of them. It said he wrote Robin Annual 5, Detective Comics Annual 9, and finally Supergirl Annual 1, which admittedly didn't quite fit the pattern of the other two. I'm sure there's a story there as to why Peter David didn't write that annual, but that's not necessarily my question. I'll answer it anyway. So my question is, what was it like writing those stories? Was it similar to the Elseworld stories you wrote, as they have a little bit more freedom from the usual continuity? It's been a while since I've read them. I'll have to hunt them down again. I worked on, that summer, worked on 3 annuals. And to be quite frank with you, I forgot about the Supergirl annual. The gimmick was, it was post-apocalyptic. You could, tell a science fiction story using any of the characters. I mean, if you were writing Green Arrow, Green Arrow didn't have an annual that year. If you were writing Green Lantern or Flash or Superman or whatever, the gimmick was tell a post-apocalyptic story from a time period long after these heroes were gone. And these stories are they canon? I don't think so. These are akin to Elseworld stories. And yeah, you were completely freed up, imagination-wise. They just let you run wild on the annuals in that period. I don't know if they let every writer run wild, but my editors had a lot of faith in me. The Supergirl thing, which I completely forgotten about and had to look up, I only wrote a 22-pager. These annuals were usually longer form stories, but I only wrote a 22-pager in the Supergirl, and then other writers wrote other short stories and like 1-page features and things like that. Now, I don't remember why Peter David didn't write it, but I can take a guess. This falls right into the period where Peter was involved with a television show based on something he had created, and he was spending a lot of time in Los Angeles and missing work. He wasn't as diligent on his titles, which is why you'll see me fill in for Peter David in this period now and again on Young Justice and things like Supergirl. I think I wrote another Supergirl story as well, maybe for the annual the year before this or the year after. I wrote a Supergirl short story. But yeah, I don't remember anything about this Supergirl story. But I, completely forgot about it. But on the subject of the annuals generally, especially the Elseworlds annuals and the theme annuals, they had a year where you chose different pulp genres to put your characters in. And what I liked about these was not only was I given creative freedom, but I was also, for some reason, given some juice as to who I wanted to work with. And so I got to pick Kike Alcatena for my pirate thing. I got to pick Flynn Henry for that post-apocalyptic thing. They put Stas Johnson on the other one, but I was fine with that. They probably called and said, "Are you okay with Stas Johnson drawing?" I was like, "Yeah, yeah, Stas is awesome." And I requested Eduardo Barreto for the Robin annual, and they said, "Yeah, that's great." And so these annuals gave me an opportunity to work with people that I really liked working with. In fact, I discussed this, I think, last week or the week before. When Sal Buscema became available, when he was fired at Marvel, I made a specific request for Sal Buscema on it was the Pulp Summer, and Detective Comics was assigned a military theme, basically be a war book, and I specifically requested Sal. Unbeknownst to me, he was in the offices. He'd come into the offices in DC looking for work, and they offered him a Batman project, and he specifically asked to work with me. And so they just stuck us together on. It's the only time I ever got to work with him, and I really dug it. It was a lot of fun. But you know, you were given a great degree of freedom, and you know, things like, you know, for whatever reason on the annuals, like this Legends of the Dark Knight annual, it was a year one. That was the theme that year. And I really wanted to tell Man-Bat's origin completely. And I wanted to tell it like a universal horror movie. And I requested Kike Alcatena. And Archie Goodwin was the editor, and he said yes. I mean, these annuals were a blast. Some of my favorite work that I did for DC, and I did a lot of work at DC, but some of my favorites and my fondest memories are these annuals, because, you know, they're one and done stories, and I was given free reign, and I got to work with the artist I wanted to work with. And this Man-Bat origin annual was turned out to be kind of poignant, because while we were working on it, while Kike was finishing up the art, Frank Robbins, the creator of Man-Bat, passed away. And I was able to convince Archie to put a little dedication at the end of the story to Frank Robbins. He wasn't sure he should do that. I don't know why. Another one of those weird secrets at DC. Why can't we acknowledge the creator of Man-Bat at the end of the story? But if I remember correctly, he said, "Ah, to hell with it. I'm just putting it in." He didn't ask permission or anything, and I'm glad he did, because I'm a huge admirer of Frank Robbins, and I wanted him acknowledged. He's seldom acknowledged as a creator of Man-Bat, and I wanted to make sure that happened in this story. But those annuals were a blast. I really did enjoy working on them. Chuck Johnson, popping over from Facebook, he says, "I'm sure that you've been asked this before, but I don't remember reading it. Since you've been a comic fan for a lot longer than you've been a legend, did you ever geek out just a little when you got to work with legends like Sal or Jim Aparo?" I geeked out all the time. It was hard not to geek out. You know, you had to sort of rein it in, because not only were you working with some of these guys, you're getting to meet a lot of these guys. You know, I'm getting to meet Steve Ditko and Jack Kirby and Al Williamson. You know, it's like, what the hell? You know, these guys I absolutely idolized. I think the only big, I was too late to the game to meet Wally Wood, and I never really met Stan Lee. I've been in the same room with Stan Lee, worked with Stan Lee on a couple of things. We talked a lot over the phone, but I never really met him in person. Never got to shake the guy's hand. But yeah, I mean, I've gotten to work with some absolute giants, from my childhood and from later. I mean, working with, some guys who were my contemporaries put me in a bit of awe, because I've gotten to work with some tremendous talents. But, just to go through a few of them, I mean, Joe Kubert. I met Joe Kubert when I visited the Kubert School early in my career. I was invited for some reason to one of their anniversary celebrations. I think because I knew so many guys at the time who were Kubert students, and they said, "Hey, come along." And I did. And I got to meet a lot of people I otherwise wouldn't have met. And I met Joe. And Joe was always very cordial, always remembered me, which I always felt honored by. And eventually we got to work together on an arc on Punisher Warzone, which was really, really enjoyable. He was a great guy to collaborate with. And, for Joe's an absolute giant in the field. I mean, he's one of these guys, he has one of the longest careers in comics, possibly the longest career in comics. And more remarkably, his work was always fresh. I mean, right to the end, his work was fresh. This guy never lost it. He never lost his play, and always thinking, always improving, always experimenting with storytelling and rendering and all the rest of it. And but the thing is, I mean, we worked together. He treated me as a complete equal, which blew me away. Not that I expect him to, pat me on the head or be condescending or anything like that, but it was like a complete equal. Like, we are partners on this, as if we, worked together all of our lives. And just a tremendous guy and tremendous talent, man. This guy loved comics. He loved comics. And he loved working in it. And he did so much for the field. And I got to work with him. Just still can't believe it. Cannot believe it. Russ Heath. Now, Russ Heath is the one I probably freaked out over the most. I got to do a story. I got to do a Moon Knight story with him, but I didn't meet or talk with him. And then later on, I got to do a Nam story with him. And Don Daly said, Russ wants to talk to you. He has a few questions on reference and things like that. And it took me 3 days to work up the nerve to call him. And the thing about Russ that was different from all of these other older pros, Russ was a gentleman, but he was also a bit of a scamp, which is putting it mildly. And he liked to, basically play with you and play with your mind mentally. And one of his tricks was to pretend to not remember me. As many times as we worked together, he always forced me to introduce myself and remind him of who I was. And I knew very well he knew who I was. Because, other times he reached out to me. It wasn't always me reaching out to him. But, Russ is one of my favorite comic art talents growing up. I mean, I just would stare at his pages and stare at his covers. I mean, just incredible draftsman and all the rest of it. And it took me a few days to work up the nerve to call him. And it was interesting. Every time you would talk to Russ, you'd get a little bit of his biography. So he was a different kind of cat to work with, but I loved it. And I miss him. Cantankerous old dude, which I'm slowly turning into, or rapidly, depending on who you talk to. John Buscema, big John Buscema, I got to work with him a bunch of times. And again, he's another guy who would request to work with me. Hey, you have any more scripts by that guy? And I think it's because I wrote, I wasn't really writing a lot of superheroes. I was writing what he wanted to draw. So we worked on, a number of Westerns and, again, another Warzone arc, which was supposed to be a 3-issue arc because John was big in demand at Marvel and they would, make him commit to this and that and the other thing. And, he really wanted to ink himself, and a lot of people wouldn't let him do that. They had him working on layouts and roughs, and other people would finish it, which was great because it still looked like John somehow. But we were working on a 3-issue arc of Warzone. Usually the arcs were 5, but they said, well, John said, I only have time for 3. As he was nearing the end of the 3rd issue of the arc, he said, hey, could we extend this a couple issues? Because he was having a good time. He was inking himself. And so I had to stretch the story out a little bit, which, I think I had to rewrite the end of the 3rd issue. He was getting near to penciling it, and I had to rewrite it ahead of him to leave a little opening for more story. But If you read the arc, I don't think you can tell. I think we did a pretty good job of hiding what we did there. Basically tacking a fourth act onto the story. But again, gratifying. The guy asked for me. The guy was asking for me. Jim Aparo, God, what a sweetheart. What a guy to work with. And I grew up on his Brave and Bold. It's weird, like most fans, back in the day, I would occasionally go through the comics to sort them and box them and everything else. And I was always surprised by how many issues of Brave and Bold I had. It's like I never missed that title, and largely because of Jim Aparo. I also loved his work on the Spectre and Phantom Stranger. I never missed an issue of that. Just terrific, dynamic stuff. And, and all of this came from like the quietest, sweetest guy in the world. All of this vibrant, dynamic imagery came from this guy, who was a consummate pro, but, mostly when you talk to him, you talk about his grandkids. I mean, just a sweetheart of a guy. I told this story before, just to tell you what kind of guy this guy was. I've told the story before, but we were all invited to San Diego Con. The whole Nightfall team was taking the San Diego Con, and Jim didn't do a lot of conventions. And so we went, and he sort of latched on to me and Graham Nolan, which was fine with us. We spent the whole time at San Diego hanging out with Jim Aparo, and he's great company. And he was a huge Seinfeld fan at the time, and he would quote the show and talk. He loved that TV show. Anyway, we were at the bar at the hotel on like a Saturday night, and Archie Goodwin comes up, and he has an Inkpot Award in his hands, and it's Jim Aparo's Inkpot Award. And Archie said, "Hey, you were supposed to show up at the Inkpot Awards ceremony and get this award." And Aparo goes, "Oh, yeah, well, I just wanted to hang out with my friends." And Graham and I, we just swelled up with pride at that. We're Jim Aparo's friends. It meant a lot to us. And Archie, being Archie, made a big deal out of presenting Jim Aparo the Inkpot Award at the bar. And Jim, took the award and sat it up next to his beer, and we went back to our conversation. That's just the kind of guy he was. Just down-to-earth dude. John Severin, another one. I mean, it was really weird getting to write with him because he was a guy, always admired his work, always felt like I had an affinity. Like if I met this guy, we would have a rapport because he was interested in so many things I was interested in. The Old West, Rudyard Kipling, the British colonial era in like Afghanistan and things, just odd things that I found interesting, and also his dedication to getting things historically accurate. The guy obviously did a lot of research. He had a huge library of books, and an enormous morgue file, all kinds of reference. So I knew, this is a guy I'd love to work with John Severin, even from an early age. And years before I got into the business professionally, I wrote a Western comic story called I think it was called The Long Ride Home. And I pictured in my head John Severin drawing it, and that's how I saw the pages, John Severin. So I wrote it as a John Severin story. Now, when I got a chance to work on Savage Tales, the Savage Tales reboot, I submitted a whole bunch of plot lines, and Long Ride Home was one of them. And I got assigned to John Severin. And on that day, when Larry Hama called me and told me that, that could have been the end of my comics career, and I would have been happy. Seriously. It's like, whoa, what? A story I wrote like 15 years ago for John Severin in my mind and my fantasy is actually going to be drawn by John Severin. And then a couple of weeks later, Larry called and said, "John Severin, I'm giving all of your Westerns to John Severin." Because I'd submitted a number of Western scripts. And I'm like, okay. I'm not going to say no. He says, if that's all right with you, and he knew he was screwing with me. He knew it was all right with me. And I later found out that the reason why he gave all of my stories to John Severin is because John Severin asked for them. He said, do you have any more by that guy? So it's like, I mean, it's one thing to get to work with these guys. It's another thing to get, even a little bit of respect from these guys. But to find out that they enjoyed the collaboration with you, it means a whole lot. It really is. It still awes me, and I still thank God that I've had the career I've had. I mean, how many people get to do that? And thankfully, all these guys had really long careers. I mean, you might make it onto the Yankees team, but you're not going to get to play with Derek Jeter or Mickey Mantle. They're gone. they don't play anymore. But I got to work with guys who are still in their prime, but were childhood idols. It's pretty amazing when you think about it. So now another couple of guys I kind of got to work with who were legends in their own field. I wrote a book called Travels with Pooh. If you're listening, not watching, it's not a book about excrement. It was a Winnie the Pooh word book, and it was like it had gatefold artwork. The pages folded out, and I wrote it, and I actually did the layout drawings on a number of the pages, and I had requested a lot of model sheets because I had that ability. I was told I could ask for reference from Walt Disney people. I asked for every Xeroxes of every model sheet they could possibly send me. And they sent me reams of Xeroxes of model sheets and style guides and drawings going all the way back. I got to see the original model sheets for Fantasia, the Xeroxes of them. Obviously didn't send me the originals. For the dinosaur sequence, which was much different than they were very cute dinosaurs in their original inception, the concept drawings. Anyway, so I'm working on this thing, and I did some layout drawings that were sent in for approval before they went to finish art, and I get a phone call, and the phone call is from Ollie Johnson and Frank Thomas. Now, if you do know those names, you're going, what? If you don't know those names, Disney had a core of animators called the Nine Old Men, and they animated, they were his main men. They were his Praetorian Guard of cartooning. And Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnson were two of them. And they called me on a conference line to talk about some of the layouts, to suggest changes and things like that. And told me that they really enjoyed what I had done, particularly on a spread that was a Western spread, in which I drew all of the ancillary figures, cavalry officers and Indians and cowboys and sheriffs and things like that. I draw all the ancillary characters, not the main character, which was Tigger. And I didn't draw the horses because I suck at horses. And I didn't draw the stagecoach because I suck at that. But I did all of the ancillary characters on this, basically 4-page gatefold piece of artwork. And they told me how much they enjoyed that and how much they were enjoying the book overall and everything. But they had a few suggestions for changes and some reference they were going to send. And they were the nicest guys in the world. Absolute legends. These guys, talk about childhood idols. These guys animated Pinocchio, my favorite Disney movie of all time. They were, they had the list of characters they animated. I could go on all day, but giants, and it was just amazing to talk to them and have them again treat me as an equal, not just, hey kid, hey dope, do this, get this done. You did this wrong. You screwed up here, buddy. Make it right. None of that. Just, compadres. Wild. Just wild. I've had a wild career here, sitting in this room making stuff up. I've got more to say, but if you've got more to say, let me know at brunobookstore@gmail.com. brunobookstore@gmail.com is the best way to get a hold of me. And we're going to go back to the questions. Brandon Woodall, in Ask Chuck Dixon, number 264, you said you enjoy deconstructive plot lines, though you clearly approach them from a story-first perspective rather than tearing things down for their own sake. Deconstruction, however, is only half the process. The other half is reconstruction, where a character or property is rebuilt into something functional while remaining recognizable. Lately, many creators and academics seem to treat deconstruction as the goal itself, especially since those works attract the most attention, but endlessly tearing things apart eventually leaves nothing. It's like renovating a house. Removing walls and flooring to understand the structure is useful, but demolishing everything without rebuilding only leaves a wreck. What do you think? Very, very cogent words. You nailed it. You answer your own question within your question. Yes, deconstructed plot lines means everything goes wrong for the character. The heist story is the most, elegant example I can think of. Almost all stories are deconstructed to one degree or another, but a heist story requires deconstruction because it starts out with the characters making plans, and then the plans go awry. And that's where the story is. That's where the plot thickens, because nothing goes the way it's planned. No one wants to see a heist story where everything goes perfectly. No one wants to see a secret mission story where there's not some screw up. You've got to throw those deconstructed things because, first of all, that's what happens in real life. And secondly, it creates story grist. It creates tension, suspense, humor, whatever. And it challenges your characters. Are they going to rise to the challenge or not? And that's it. The goal is not to deconstruct the characters. It's to temper them through adversity. The obstacles you throw in front of them reveal their character. And that's what it's really about. Are they still resolute and courageous and brave at the end? Do we admire them more? I mean, how else to bring out the coolness of a character by throwing stuff in their way and seeing how they deal with it, how clever they are, how tough they are. And that is the goal of a deconstructed plot line. And the greatest stories, and even just to have a good story, you've got to have those elements of, hey, when everything went wrong, this guy held it together. This guy was tough. And, or he or she, or they figured it out, or they were smart enough, or resourceful enough. And that's it. Who wants to see a movie where the lead character falls into a trap and then just doesn't get out of it? It's like, who wants to see a movie where we set up a heroic character and find out he's a hapless boob at the end? But you're right. So many stories just kind of don't understand. So, so many writers don't understand. That's where you're going. I mean, the writer that I replaced to get Detective Comics, that was Denny O'Neil's biggest problem with that writer, is that he couldn't write he didn't seem to understand that Batman had to be triumphant at the end of the story. Batman had to come out on top. That each story did not serve the purpose of taking something away from the character. It's supposed to enhance and add to the character. And so, yeah, you kind of nailed it. You nailed it to an extent where it wasn't even necessary for me to answer the question because you stated it so perfectly. But it's my show, and I felt like, folks wanted me to say more about it. Although I don't think I added anything more to what you said than to simply reiterated it. I mean, I was bloviating like a panelist on a primetime opinion show. Anyway, hey, another twin spin. We are full of twin spins. Here comes the Millennium Falcon once again. to celebrate Brandon's next question. He says, I know the earliest Tarzan novels and Sherlock Holmes stories are in public domain, and I've considered writing a pastiche featuring them alongside other public domain literary characters. However, I've also heard that Herb Incorporated is notoriously strict about how Edgar Rice Burroughs characters are used, even when the material is public domain. Is there anything I should keep in mind while venturing into a project like this? Yeah, public domain is tricky because, like, there's public domain, things that are public domain in Europe that aren't public domain here. When a character, like, let's say Superman, becomes public domain, only the earliest story is public domain. As time goes on, more and more of Superman's story will become public domain. So when you start, you don't have Jimmy Olsen, you don't have Perry Mason, you don't have Perry White. Did I make that mistake on another one? I think I did. You don't have Perry White, you don't have Lex Luthor, Brainiac, all the rest of it. So it's kind of hard to adapt. And as we've seen, if you stick to that material, you're theoretically good to go. And yeah, Edgar Rice Burroughs people, they jealously guard their properties. That's why when I wrote my Mars pastiche, Edgar Rice Burroughs Barzoom pastiche, Guns of Mars, I set it 1,000 years after the events of the Mars series, so none of the characters appear. Just the general concepts, restricted to concepts only that appeared in Princess of Mars, to make sure I was safely within the guidelines. We still might hear from the Burroughs people because the lawyers get involved. Now, something can be public domain, and you can have all the proof that it's public domain and everything else, and the original rights holder can still hit you with a cease and desist and threaten all kinds of dire legal consequences if you don't stop publishing. And you can say, hey, but I have the right. And they say, well, then let's go to court. And they know what's going to happen then because they got more money than you got. And they can delay and have continuances and appeals and all the rest until you're out of money. And, even though you're right and you can prove in the end you're right, you're going to be poor. And they know that. That's what happened with the Conan books that I wrote for Castalia House. Conan is in public domain. I used nothing in the books that wasn't in public domain. I used only elements of Robert E. Howard's work. We still got hit with a cease and desist, and it was still made very clear to us that if we went to court, yes, we would win, but it would cost us legal fees. And the thing is, you think, well, these guys, these bastards, they came down on us like a ton of bricks. They're a bunch of meanies. No, it was all very cordial, actually. It was all very, very cordial and everything else. And we were like, okay, we're sorry. We'll stop publishing it. And I still have the promise that Titan Books will republish them, repackage them, republish them, and finally publish my third Conan novel. But that has not happened yet. But that's what you got to think about with public domain. Yes, technically it's public domain. Now, you see a lot of public domain comic book characters out there, and those people don't get sued. Why don't they get sued? Because those original publishers are out of business. They are no longer in business. Or someone else has already gone to court and proven those characters are in public domain. Plastic Man and The Spirit are in public domain because in the one case, Will Eisner did not renew copyright, and in the other case, DC did not assure their ownership of Plastic Man. They took ownership of Plastic Man, but they didn't do the due diligence on Plastic Man or a lot of the other characters like Blackhawks and Captain Marvel, the original Captain Marvel. They didn't do the due diligence, so those you can do new stories with those characters, and or if you do if you do new stories, you might hear from DC. But if you reprint them, there's really nothing they can do. I mean, Spirit. I was just reading this yesterday. Spirit. All of Will Eisner's Spirit is in complete public domain. You can repackage it and republish it at will. And there's really nothing anybody can do about it. So, and I assume you could do new Spirit stories because there's no one to tell you not to. But in the case of a Disney property or a Burroughs property or a DC Comics or Marvel property, they're still in existence and they still have lawyers who are right now hanging on hooks somewhere, waiting to be deployed against some poor soul who crosses the line. They live to sue. Michael Partika, you had a slip of the tongue in ACD 264 where you twice referred to the Horseman's sister Patty as his sister-in-law, which reminded me that I've always wondered why you decided to have Patty be Hector's sister rather than his sister-in-law, seeing how that cut off any chance that there's someday developing any romantic tension between them. Or was that the point? And if so, why? Since taking the possibility of romance off the board would seem to me to leave the storytelling field less fertile. I don't know which copy of The Horseman you read, but Patty is his sister-in-law. It's stated in the book that Hector's brother died. It's never made clear how. It's implied that it was an accident. And leaving Patty, Hector's sister-in-law, and son, which is Hector's nephew, alive. And this same accident put Patty in a wheelchair. So, yeah, it's his sister-in-law. And it doesn't prohibit a possible romantic entanglement between them, although that will happen over my dead body. I don't like it. We've all seen TV shows that went on too long, and eventually by the end of the TV show's run, everyone on the show has slept with everyone else on the show, and I hate that kind of thing, and I don't want it to happen. There is no sexual tension between Hector and his sister-in-law. He treats her like a sister, and it's pretty obvious in the stories that's happening. And to avoid any assumptions like that, I hurriedly gave Patty a boyfriend. Well, if I was working at DC or Marvel, she'd have a girlfriend. I gave her a boyfriend, and I want to get back to that character because he cracks me up. He's so clueless as to what's going on in the Caballero family. But yeah, that's his sister-in-law. I thought I made that really clear. That's why she doesn't look anything like him. Oh man! But you earned yourself a twin spin, my friend. There we go. Han and Chewie doing a flyby. Michael Partika again. While I'm on Hector and Patty, when I heard that the Horseman was going to be a Hispanic character, I thought, great, we need more visually diverse characters in comics. Even white guys like me get tired of looking at white characters all the time. But then I picked up Horseman, and Hector is basically Frank Castle, while Patty is basically Barbara Gordon, explained by her having a Spanish father and Irish mother. No, she didn't. As you've now learned. Now I've known since the Trayvon Martin media frenzy that white Hispanics exist. One famous Hollywood example being Martin Sheen, born Ramon Estevez, and his sons Charlie Sheen, born Carlos Estevez and Emilio Estevez. But why pass on the opportunity to add a black Hispanic family with the siblings looking more like Tina Huerta? I don't know who that is. Zoe Saldana? I do know who that is, for example. For a change of scenery, and only scenery, because I don't believe making a character of this ethnicity, race, versus that means you necessarily have to write the character any differently. Okay, number one, when I create a character, I don't really tell the artist anything about what they look like. Joe Bennett drew the character. Joe Bennett is from Brazil, certainly understands that there's a great diversity amongst the way people look in Latin America. And I did not tell him what Hector would look like. He was perfectly free to make Hector look more ethnic. Certainly coming from Brazil, I'm sort of in Joe's circle of friends and family have black Hispanics, in the mix. But I never tell my artists the ethnicity unless it's important to the story. I remember in Nightwing, I created a Muslim character. I mean, I was way ahead of the curve. I created a detective who was a practicing Muslim. And in that case, Scott McDaniel drew a guy who had, Arabic features, Semitic features. So that's cool. But yeah, I didn't tell Joe what kind of Hispanic to draw. And it was important to me that Hector be what I call an assimilated Hispanic. He's just an American. He's an American with a Hispanic last name, for the most part. And he could very well have been a black Hispanic or a mixed race Hispanic. But I didn't specify because I was leaving it up to Joe. Because he's going to have to draw the guy over and over and over again. I think I did say that Patty was not Hispanic. Specifically, don't make her Hispanic, but make her anything else. She could have been black. She could have been Asian, for that matter. But he chose to make her a white redhead, a ginger. Fine, that was his choice. And I think he did a really good job with the son, making him look mixed between the two. He put some thought into that. But, yeah, I mean, and his appearance, obviously, as you said, would not have changed how I wrote the character. On the subject of diversity as a whole, diversity is fine if it's part of the character base. G.I. Joe is possibly the most diverse cast of any comic, and early on, the most diverse cast of characters. So there's somebody from everywhere in that series somewhere, but it reflected the nature of the comic that Larry was creating. It was a comic based on the military, and the United States military is diverse. Where you came from, what you look like, is irrelevant to the United States military. You are a soldier, a sailor, a Marine, an airman, a coastie, and that's all that's important. It's the uniform, the color of your uniform, not the color of your skin. And so it was a rich environment for Larry to introduce all of these, this great mix, ethnic mix, nationality mix of characters, and he had a lot of fun doing it. And it was like his goal was to make a G.I. Joe that every kid could identify with, which fits the mission. The mission of G.I. Joe was to make it acceptable to kids, make kids fall in love with these characters, and Larry did that in spades. Now, at Rippaverse, we have a diverse cast because it reflects the urban environment of Florist Park. In the same way, when I wrote Batman or The Punisher or whatever, I was reflecting the ethnic and nationality mix of an urban environment. I remember when I was a kid, Steve Ditko was the first artist to draw like black people into his stories. Like if he had a street scene and there were people walking down the street, he'd just throw in a black guy or a black woman, or an Asian person. And he was really the first person, because up till then, if you saw like a city street scene in a comic, it was, like it took place in Kansas. It was all white people all the time because that was like the default setting. It's like, oh, it's a crowd of people, it's a crowd of white people. But Ditko lived in New York City. He was reflecting the environment more accurately. That's the first time I remember being struck by that. I was like, wow, that looks more like a street I'm used to seeing in Philadelphia, where I grew up. That looks more like Chestnut Street or Market Street than what I usually see in a comic book. And that was pretty cool. So if you're reflecting the environment, that's great. Because what's really important, what's the unifying thing, particularly in the United States, the unifying thing is that you're an American, that you assimilate. And a problem that we're having now is we have this mass, I'm not going to call it immigration, there's this invasion of people coming here who are quote unquote undocumented. They're illegal aliens, they broke the law, they show up here, often with the aid of the government, which is weird because they're supposed to be illegal, but the government helped them get here. And they don't assimilate. And we're seeing the problems with that, problems that Europe has already experienced for decades. I mean, once upon a time, you came to America and you moved into a neighborhood. Maybe you were in you couldn't afford to live anywhere else. Okay, so you were living cheek by jowl, with other ethnicities. And you were forced to assimilate, and you were forced to become Americans because that was the only other option. You couldn't keep going on with the culture that you left behind. Yeah, you can keep your culture, but you got to adopt American culture too. You got to adapt it to American culture. I mean, when the neighborhood I grew up in was roughly half Irish, half Italian. The unifying factor was that almost all of them were Catholic. My neighborhood was like 90% Catholic. And so the Irish and the Italians, and, we had the wrong kind of Irish too. You had the right kind of Irish and wrong. That's how the lines were drawn. And then the Polish people, they lived over in another town. And, but we had the unifying thing of the Catholic Church and the unifying thing of America. Now, I can't tell you how many kids that I grew up with, I went to school with, whose parents were from the old country. They were from Italy. They were from Ireland. They were from Germany. And how many of their grandparents still spoke only the original language? My next door neighbors growing up, their grandmother lived with them. She spoke Irish. She didn't speak English. And a lot of my friends, I had a lot of Italian friends, they all had a grandma or grandpa who spoke only Italian. But the difference is the parents forced the kids to learn English or speak English. Only speak English. Yeah, we know grandma speaks Italian, but don't do a lot of that. Speak English. Got to speak English. Got to become an American. Can't succeed here unless you become an American. So they assimilated. They didn't leave anything behind. They didn't leave any of their heritage or their culture behind, but they became Americans. They unified. And we see so many people now that don't. And I like to encourage assimilation, even in my comic book stories. It's like, come on in. I mean, the media, we see in the media where they treat Hispanics or Latinos or whatever they're going to call them this week, they treat them like an other. And in your head, you're thinking, okay, well, they're like an other. They're like foreign because they're Gutierrez or Diaz or Ortega. But then you think about it and you go, wait a minute, I know people with names like that, last names like that. And they're not like that. They're not walking around in a sombrero. They're not leading a donkey. They're like me. They're going to Sam's Club. They're, they've assimilated. Hispanics have been here in the United States since the beginning. They were here before the white people. They're still here. I mean, the Southwest and large parts of Texas have always been majority Hispanic. And so they are not as American as us. They are American. We're as American as them. They're as American as us. And that last name doesn't matter. Just like if you have an Italian last name or a German last name, who thinks of that? You probably have Hispanic friends and you've never once for a second thought about that. You never thought, well, where'd they come from? Are they Puerto Rican? Are they Cuban? Are they Ecuadorian? What does it matter? You have Italian friends. Are they Neapolitan? Are they Sicilian? Who cares? They're Americans. They're not hyphenated Americans. They're Americans. So I'm about assimilation, because diversity is not a value unto itself. And yet we're being told it is. And we're having this stuff forced on us. Now, I'm fine with a diverse cast when it makes sense. But when you have a black woman as a Viking queen, I'm sorry, that never happened. When you're saying the Vikings weren't racist, you're out of your freaking mind. Okay, this is the past. They didn't have they didn't have assimilation back then. The only I hate to say this, I hate to be this coarse, but the only assimilation Vikings believed in was rape. So you have a black Viking. I mean, she's 100% black, African, and she's a Viking queen. It takes you right out of the story, because you're like, that couldn't happen. And I'm like, can't you, if you want to have these people in a story, whatever people they are, put them, create a story for them. I think I've mentioned this before. I talked to an Egyptian guy, a film producer, and he was putting together money to make epics, like, big, like Avengers type movies about sub-Saharan Africa and their mythology, the rich mythologies, crazy, crazy stories that you could tell based in sub-Saharan. And he was trying to release like big budget. I don't know if he ever did, and they simply didn't get distributed here. But he wanted to make these big budget epics about. And I'm like, man, I want to see that. I mean, that's exploring their heritage, and I wouldn't want to see a white guy thrown in the middle of it just for the hell of it. Because that's not right either. It's like, can't we keep this stuff historically accurate? It breaks my heart when I see something that might be entertaining. I mean, the first season of Barbarians on Netflix, I loved it. It was about the destruction of Varus's legion in the Teutoburg forest during the reign of Augustus Caesar. And it was fantastic. I mean, it was over the top crazy gonzo, but it was largely historically accurate and really terrific. And then they did a second season, and all of a sudden there's a bunch of brothers mixed in with the Germanic tribes. Talk about people who wouldn't tolerate anybody different from them. We're talking about ancient Germans. Where'd this guy come from? How did he get here? Why did they accept him as one of their own and give him like a position of authority? It just doesn't make any sense. And again, demeans everybody. Nobody profits by this. It's like, yeah, we're going to, we feel sorry for your people, so we're going to include them in all these stories where they don't belong. And even creating diverse casts for the sake of diversity doesn't work, because generally these things are written by white guys or white women, and they're insulting because they use only they use all the stereotypes, the unconscious stereotypes, and they also make all of the ethnic, the non-white characters are all good and pure and wholesome and wonderful, which only leaves you white people to be the bad guys. And more than that, the non-white people, not only are they pure and wonderful and wholesome, they're also boring with no personality beyond the color of their skin or their, in a lot of cases, their sexual preference. That's the only interesting thing about them, and that's not that interesting. I mean, if you had a character who had the head of a giraffe, okay, that's different. That's interesting. But if you have a character who's, Armenian. It's like, well, I've met Armenians. I mean, they're nice people, but there's nothing that special about them that makes them interesting just because they're Armenians. I mean, if you met like a Tibetan monk, you would go, oh, wow, this guy's a Tibetan monk. Imagine the things he's seen. That is interesting. But if it's just a guy from Tibet, you're like, okay, if you understand what I'm saying here. When I worked on Way of the Rat, this is how things have flip-flopped and changed. Although, Hollywood's still cynical place. I was working on Way of the Rat at CrossGen, and we had real interest from Hollywood. I mean, to the point where Frank Darabont wrote a screenplay, and it was almost greenlit at DreamWorks. Thank you, Steven Spielberg. It was almost greenlit. So we were really far along. The screenplay was one of, it made Variety's top 10 unproduced screenplays list one year. And we really thought we were going someplace with this. But every person we showed it to, every studio said the same thing. You got to put a white guy in it. It was an all-Asian cast. It was a martial arts period fantasy. And they said, you got to put a white guy in it. So we had to write a white character into the comic series. I don't know why they couldn't just put a white guy in the movie, but we had to write a white guy into the series, which we did, but I'm like, is this really necessary? And my argument was always, look at Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, all Asian cast, subtitled, made a fortune here. And they were, that was a fluke. Well, what was a fluke about it? Maybe Way of the Rat can be a fluke. But no, we had to put a white guy in it. And today it would be the reverse. We would have to put someone else in it. We would have to put some other ethnicity. We'd have to put Pedro Pascal in it because apparently that's the law. But that's how far things have gone. But it all comes from the same place. It comes from this level of cynicism in Hollywood about race, about ethnicity, about nationality, about political correctness. They wanted a white guy in Way of the Rat for the same reason Netflix wanted a black woman in the Vikings, because they thought they were pandering, is what they were doing. They were thinking, well, for Way of the Rat, well, white people won't see it unless there's a white guy in it, which is completely freaking wrong. I mean, by that way of thinking, if you look at demographics, no one goes to the movies more than African Americans. African Americans are moviegoers. I mean, nobody even comes close. Now, is every movie all black casts? No, because they don't care. And you shouldn't care. And I don't care. Nobody cares. If it's a good movie, I want to go see it. I don't care if it's, if it's an all rhinoceros cast. If it's a good movie, who cares? If it's puppets. If it's a good movie, who cares? But Hollywood is, they're what they are. So, a bunch of dopes who think you're stupid and apparently think you're racist. I'm talking to all of you. We're all racist because we don't want to see people different than... No, we do. We don't care. Give me a good story. I don't care. Anyway, one more thing. Something came up on Facebook this week that I found interesting. It's about Hot Wheels number 5. Issue number 5 was a DC comic based on the Hot Wheels toys. Those little cars go down a little plastic track that apparently are still a huge thing, but they were enormous in the 70s. And DC licensed Mattel Toys to do a Hot Wheels comic that they had drawn by Alex Toth. And you're like, Chuck, why are you talking about this? It's a movie tie-in comic. Who cares? Nobody remembers this. Nobody but you. But it's an interesting story. Because as I said, Alex Toth was the artist on the series. And they picked him because he's a car guy. He had drawn for Cartoons magazine. Oh, man, if you ever get to see some of his cartoons work. Car, C-A-R, Tunes, hyphen. And Cycle Tunes was another magazine it was like a Mad magazine for car nuts. And Toth did some amazing stuff in those magazines. along with a lot of Russ Manning, a lot of other great comic book artists who were car nuts, worked at those magazines, and they lived near the magazines. Were published out of California because it was California car culture. This is the 1960s. This is the Beach Boys, My 409 and all that stuff. So and Big Daddy Ed Roth, and California car culture was a huge thing, not just in California but across the country. I remember when I was a kid, we were all nuts for funny cars and custom cars and stuff like that. And the Weirdos and Rat Fink and all that stuff all came out of California. It was this rich culture. And Toth lived in the area, and he was a car nut himself. So he got picked to do Hot Wheels because he would enjoy drawing the cars. He was good at it. And plus, he's Alex Toth. He's a great storyteller. But Toth got a little sick of the scripts he was getting. I think it was Arnold Drake. And I know this because I saw him talk about this at the very first comic book convention. He had just completed this issue of Hot Wheels. And he was at the New York Comic Book Convention. That the first one I ever went to. He was a keynote address speaker, and he told this story. And he said he was a little sick of how the scripts were written by guys who didn't know anything about cars, didn't care about cars, didn't own cars, didn't understand cars. And he was doing the best he could, and I think it might have been Arnold Drake. I mean, he was a good writer, but not suited to write something like this. And they brought him the script for issue 5, and he at that point he'd had it. He just tore the script up. And then he told us this at the convention. I heard this right from the man's mouth, and he tore the script up and said, "I'm gonna write my own. I'm gonna write my own script." So that's what he did, and he told this terrific mystery story about I think a 1932 Cord car. If you've never seen a Cord, amazing looking car, and he told it in like this 8-panel grid way of storytelling, and it's a brilliant story. I loved it when I first read it. It still holds up. It's a terrific story. It's a lot of fun. The mystery works. Everything about it works. And the thing is, how did he get by not using the script that was given to him? Because DC, man, they were hard asses back then. You had to follow the rules. Even Alex Toth had to follow the rules. Well, what he said was he tore up the script, but he didn't tell them. And he didn't tell them he was rewriting it. And he was doing everything here. So he simply did not hand in the finished artwork until it was too late to do anything about it. He held back the artwork to the very last minute, handed it in, and DC had no choice but to publish it because, the presses were ready. The print time was scheduled. This comic was going to go out to the newsstands on this date, and there was no time to do anything. And this is only issue 5. They can't very well reprint an earlier issue. So he left them in a corner. He obviously never worked on Hot Wheels again. But he made his point. And the other thing he did, which I really got to admire, was in later years, he redrew the characters' faces and changed the characters' names and resold this story, not as a Hot Wheels story, but just as an Alex Toth story. He resold it to European publishers. I was like, I got to admire that. It was so Kobayashi Maru. He just made his own rules all the way down the line on this issue. And that was Toth, man. That was Toth. Guy was a ball buster. But I thought I'd share that story in case you had never heard it. Hey, 7 Deadly Sinners is getting ready to come out, so gear yourself up. Speaking of car culture, for 7 Deadly Sinners coming soon from Ripasend. The solicits should be going out. Maybe this is going to pop up tomorrow, so I haven't heard anything. But the first couple of weeks of this month is when 7 Deadly Sinners is going to come your way. A 110-page graphic novel by me and Bob C. Harden with lots of extras, including this faux movie poster, which I absolutely freaking love. And all of that should be available soon from the fine folks at Ripaverse through their Ripasend program. So keep an eye out for that. And that's it. Boy, I ran over the hour mark here. Not usual for me. But I want to thank you for listening. Thank you for watching and liking and subscribing and all the rest of it. And hopefully I will see you down the road.